Why does the Dow Jones get so much attention? We often hear things like, the Dow dropped 300 points today, or the Dow hit a new high. It seems to be everywhere, but most people don't really know what it is or its significance. It's one of the oldest indexes we have, but also one of the quirkiest. So why does it still make all the headlines? Is it still relevant? Or are people just following it out of habit? In this video, I'll break down everything you thought you knew about the Dow, but probably had wrong. From its history to how it's calculated to why it might not even be the best market indicator today. So let's jump right in. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, often just called the Dow, is one of the most watched stock market indexes in the world. It tracks only 30 large publicly traded U.S. companies. The Dow was created way back in 1896 by Charles Dow, one of the founders of the Dow Jones Company and the first editor of the Wall Street Journal. It's actually named after two of its founders, Charles Dow and Edward Jones. Originally, the Dow started with just 12 companies. Then it expanded to 20 in 1916 and finally grew to 30 companies in 1928, where it still stands today. But here's where things start to get a little weird. Unlike the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq, which are both market cap weighted, meaning bigger companies have more of an influence, the Dow is what's called price weighted. That means companies with a higher stock price have a bigger impact on the index, regardless of how large or valuable the company actually is. Take this example. The Dow includes giants like Apple, Nvidia, and Amazon, but they don't carry as much weight as you might expect. Instead, companies like Goldman Sachs and Caterpillar, much smaller by market value, actually move the index more. Why? Well, it's because their stock prices are higher. During the fall of 2025, Goldman Sachs was trading around $790 per share, and Nvidia was around $187. So even though Nvidia was the largest company in the world by market cap, worth over $4.5 trillion, it has less influence on the Dow than Goldman Sachs, which had a market cap of less than $240 billion. So even though Goldman Sachs was about 19 times smaller, yet its stock price gives it more than 4 times more weight in the index. Or Goldman Sachs made up roughly 10% of the Dow, while Nvidia sits at around 2.5%. So does that make any sense to you? Not really. It's like handing out trophies based on who paid the most to enter the race. But it's one of the main reasons why many people don't view the Dow as a very accurate representation of the broader market or economy. Another interesting quirk is how companies actually get selected for the Dow. Unlike the S&P 500, which follows a pretty clear, rules-based process, the Dow doesn't have strict guidelines for how stocks make the cut, so choices can feel a bit arbitrary. A committee at the S&P Dow Jones Indices decides which company actually get in. They look at things like reputation, steady growth, investor interest, and stock price. Their goal is to create a mix of businesses that represent key sectors like technology, finance, manufacturing, and retail, but companies from transportation and utilities are not included. There's no strict formula or checklist they follow. Changes happen rarely and sometimes unexpectedly. Companies might get added or dropped because of mergers, bankruptcies, or simply the committee's judgment of what's the best fit at the time. So with only 30 companies and a quirky price-weighted system and a hand-picked lineup, you might wonder why the Dow still hogs all the spotlight. The truth? It really comes down to just habit and name recognition. It's a market number everybody's heard of, even if they've never owned a stock. Plus, it makes for dramatic headlines. the Dow plunges 500 points. It's short, dramatic, and sounds huge. And when it crosses milestones like 30,000 or 40,000, it feels like a big deal. Never mind that those numbers are totally arbitrary. In the end, the media's preference for the Dow has more to do with tradition and drama than accuracy. The media likes the psychological impact. Dow hits a new high. Sounds exciting. The S&P 500 up 1.3% doesn't grab that same attention. Another unusual aspect of the Dow is how it's calculated. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is determined by adding up the stock prices of all 30 companies and then dividing by a special number called the Dow divisor. Over time, this divisor gets adjusted to maintain consistency when stock splits, dividends, spin-offs, or changes occur to the index. This special divisor has changed dramatically over the years, from a high of 16.67 in 1928 to below 1 in 1986, and currently sits at this number, which you can take a look at, in the fourth quarter of 2025. Using this divisor allows the Dow to produce a comparable average despite all the adjustments over time. If you've watched this channel before, you know I often talk about the S&P 500. It's important to understand how it differs from the Dow Jones Industrial Average, since both are widely used benchmarks. The key differences? Well, the S&P 500 tracks 500 companies and is weighted by market capitalization, meaning the biggest companies have the most influence. The Dow, on the other hand, only 30 companies and is price weighted, so the higher priced stocks move the index more regardless of the company's size. In other words, the S&P 500 reflects a much broader slice of the market, nearly 17 times as many companies as the Dow, making it a more comprehensive snapshot of the U.S. economy. So what's the bottom line? The Dow is historic, symbolic, and grabs headlines, but it's not the most accurate reflection of the market. With only 30 companies, a price-weighted system, and a selective process to choose the companies, it can give a misleading snapshot. For a broader, more reliable view, most investors look to the S&P 500. That's why there are so many low-cost ETFs for the S&P 500, like VOO, SPY, IVV, and SPLG. The Dow has just one popular ETF, DIA. Even though VOO faces plenty of competition, it still has over $1.4 trillion invested. Compare that to DIA, which only has about $39 billion. How did they perform? Well, over the last 10 years, ending in August of 2025, DIA has averaged about 12.94% per year, while VOO has averaged about 14.56%, a notable difference over a 10-year period. So the next time you see a headline about the Dow, you'll know exactly what it's telling you and what it's not. In short, the Dow makes headlines and has history on its side. But for most investors, broader indexes like the S&P 500 and the ETFs that track them give a much clearer picture of the market and a stronger foundation for long-term investing. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, leave some comments below. I'd sure appreciate it. Thank you for watching.